Cattle USA Daily Podcast. Today we are welcoming Jonathan Cammack on with Oklahoma Research and Extension to talk about the Asian Longhorn Tick and what that means for us as producers. This tick is semi-new. It has been here for about 15 years in the United States and has continuously moved west and moved south, and we are continuing to monitor it. And a lot of research has started to come out with it. So Jonathan is here today to talk all about the how, what, when, where, why that we need to be doing as producers to continue to fight this tick and just be an informed producer population. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into this episode with Jonathan. Jonathan, welcome to the podcast. We are so excited to welcome you on today and to chat a little bit more about Asian Longhorn ticks and what that means for the cattle industry, producers, and everything. I would love if you could take it away, share a little bit about what you do, your role, your position, and what you do within research.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction and the invite, Lauren. So I am an assistant professor and state extension specialist for livestock entomology and parasitology at Oklahoma State University. So basically, that's a lot of words to describe that, if we're talking about some sort of external pest or parasite, whether that's a fly or a tick of any sort of livestock animal, chicken, pig, goat, cow, horse, whatever that might be, I've got kind of statewide responsibility in dealing with those pest issues. Now, the pest that we're going to talk about today is the Asian Longhorn tick. And last summer, Oklahoma became the 21st state in the country to have confirmed populations of this. We'll call it a new pest, but it's been present in the United States for, we think about 15 years or so at this point.
Awesome. Can you share a little bit more about what the tick is, why it's kind of even an issue in the first place, and just a little bit more about it, just for background context for everyone as well?
Sure. So it's a non-native or invasive species. It was first found kind of in the northeastern part of the United States around 2010. We had some initial reports that were a few years later than that, but as researchers went back through samples of ticks that they had collected, in previous years, they found, hey, we actually had this species present in other states and in earlier times than what we initially thought. So, we think that sometime around 2010 is when they were first introduced to the northeastern part of the country. And since that time, they've been spreading west and south. They're problematic for a number of reasons. The first of which, they're ticks, right? Nobody likes them. They blood feed. Usually we don't feel it, right? It's not like a mosquito bite or something that you notice immediately. Usually when you get blood fed on by a tick, it's something that you notice later, right? You see the tick, or you feel it, like if you touch it. And then afterwards, we might have some sort of dermatitis, or some sort of, allergic or itching response, to that bite. But it's something completely different than what we typically, experience with some of these other biting pests. Now, for livestock and other animals, they're problematic because they're blood feeding on them as well. And they can feed in extremely high numbers. Usually when we think about ticks on animals, there's not a whole lot, typically of ticks on an animal, right? If we're thinking about something like Lone Star ticks on a cow, we might have 10, 50 or something feeding on that animal, which is going to have some sort of an economic impact on that cow because of the irritation that they're experiencing. But with Asian Longhorn ticks, we're in a completely different situation. Usually when we think about tick biology, we think about the different host animals that they feed on while they're growing. So something like a Lone Star tick, which is a common tick across a lot of kind of the country, or even an Asian Longhorn tick, we would classify those as 3 host ticks. So over the course of their lifespan, they're going to feed on 3 different host animals. And usually those host animals are going to get a little bit bigger with each successive blood feeding. So a larval tick's going to feed on something small, maybe a rodent. It's going to take that blood meal, drop off, digest that in the environment. A few months later, when it's ready for its next blood meal, it's going to go out, host seeking. It might get on a raccoon or a rabbit or a dog or something as a nymph and take that blood meal, drop off, digest it, and then the adults are going to get on something larger, deer, cow, person, take their blood meal. Now, with Asian Longhorn ticks, what we see is even though they're classified as 3 host ticks, we can often see all 3 life stages, larvae, nymphs, and adults, on the same host animal, like individual and also species. So we could have a very high number of these ticks feeding on something like a cow, which, is a very large host. But there are cases where the numbers of these ticks have been so high on individual animals that the animal can actually succumb to those ticks from kind of that blood loss because of that huge amount of ticks. Now, that's extremely rare. I mean, we'd have probably thousands of ticks on that animal. And numbers can get that high because in comparison to some of our other ticks, adult Asian Longhorn ticks are extremely small. They're about half the size of Lone Star ticks or black-legged ticks or some of the other tick species that we might be commonly encountering. So they could go unnoticed because we're just not going to see them. So in addition to being small, one of the biggest challenges with them is the females reproduce through a process known as parthenogenesis. So that's asexual reproduction. So they don't have that added challenge of locating a male tick in the environment to be able to reproduce. And to date, most populations of Asian Longhorn ticks in the United States are, we'll say, 100% female, but we've had some isolated reports of maybe one male collected out of hundreds of females in that same collection period. So those females are able to lay a very large number of eggs over the course of their lifespan, about 2,500 eggs. So we can have populations of them increasing exponentially because they can take that blood meal as an adult and then just immediately go into egg production, and those eggs are going to hatch, and then we're going to have more larvae present to feed on animals.
Can you share a little bit more about the migration pattern that we have seen with these ticks over the past 10-15 years? You said it started in the Northeast. Now we're obviously seeing issues with them in the Midwest and further west as they go. Can you just share a little bit more about that?
Sure. Luckily, one of the good things about it is this is a species that's kind of tropical and subtropical in origin, so it's very sensitive to humidity. So unfortunately for a lot of the eastern, southeastern, and kind of the upper Midwest of the country, it's kind of well within the humidity range of the tick based on the environmental models that have been published so far. And what we can see so far based on some of these environmental models is that at least for Oklahoma, central Oklahoma is going to be about the western edge of kind of its predicted range, because anywhere basically west of I-35, it's going to be a little too dry. And we can kind of follow that same line up into Kansas. So about the eastern third of Kansas is going to be the area that would be most likely to be able to support Asian Longhorn ticks. Now, as of April and May of 2025, there aren't any confirmed cases within Kansas, but there are certainly counties within Missouri and Arkansas and northeastern Oklahoma that have documented populations of Asian Longhorn ticks.
Absolutely. So what's the precaution that we need to be taking with these ticks? Obviously, you've shared a little bit about the impact that these ticks are having on the economy, the environment, how truly bad they are. But can you share a little bit more about what are we doing from a research standpoint, but then also what do we need to be doing to be proactive as producers against these ticks?
Yeah, so I think the good news is we've got 15 years worth of experience with this tick in the kind of northeastern part of the United States, and there are a number of researchers that are livestock entomologists like myself, kind of across that kind of gradient of the country that have been working on this as it has moved into their state. So we have a lot of information on it. Some of the best things that this research that's been conducted has found is that really to kind of help prevent the spread of Asian Longhorn ticks is to limit the movement of animals as much as possible. So one thing that I didn't mention earlier is so far Asian Longhorn ticks have been collected from about 150 species of animals in the environment. So that's everything from pets to wildlife to livestock to people. So there are a lot of animals in the environment that are contributing to the movement and the spread of Asian Longhorn ticks across the country. Right? Those ticks and wildlife, they don't care about county lines or state borders or anything like that. So they're moving and contributing to that spread. But if we think about what we can do with our livestock, we can control where they go. And so we want to be vigilant about that. If, moving animals from an area that is positive for Asian Longhorn ticks, we'd want to inspect them, to make sure that there aren't any on there. And we would want to be really careful about moving those animals from an area that's, known to have Asian Longhorn ticks to an area that doesn't. So limiting movement of animals is one of the best things that producers can do. Another thing is what we would call cultural control in within integrated pest management. And that's things that we could do to modify the environment to make it uninhabitable for the ticks. So a good example that people can relate to would be thinking about mosquitoes. Mosquitoes need standing water to be able to reproduce in. If you've got old tires laying around, or a bird bath that's not running, or a 5-gallon bucket that's full of water, you can kick that over and spill that water out, and it makes that environment less inhabitable by mosquitoes. So we can do the same thing for ticks. Ticks are spending 95% of their lifetime off of the host animal. So they're in the environment, digesting that blood meal that they took, molting, hanging out, waiting for their next meal. With this particular species, they need that high humidity environment. So, we can think about they're going to be kind of in the leaf litter or down in kind of that thatch layer within grass, where the humidity is going to be a lot higher. We're not going to expect to see them out in the middle of a pasture where there's not a tree in sight. It's going to be too dry, and probably too hot for them to be able to survive within that situation. So if we can either keep animals out of heavily wooded areas, or you're right, we want to make sure that we're providing shade or something for our cattle. But if we are, make sure that the kind of that underbrush area around those trees is cleared out. So something as simple as even going through with a brush hog on a tractor to kind of cut that material down disrupts that environment enough, and it makes it to where the ticks can't survive. So same thing with tall grass, right? We want our animals to be able to have access to grass to eat, but if we've got areas where there's a lot of overgrowth that the animals aren't in, we can mow that down, and it'll help kind of disrupt that habitat for the ticks.
Absolutely. From an animal health standpoint, porons, any advice there as far as like animal health and products that people could be using?
Yeah, so to this point, everything that has been tested, there's kind of a couple of studies that have been done by some colleagues at other universities testing sprays and pour-on acaricides, and what they found are products that are labeled for use against ticks in general are effective against Asian Longhorn ticks. So if you've got a product that you're already using that you like, that's doing a good job for other tick species, keep using it. And if you use that in conjunction with that environmental modification that we just talked about, and also limiting the movement of animals, what research has shown out of Tennessee is that can have a huge impact on Asian Longhorn tick populations.
Perfect. As we go out into the future, the next few years, and keep battling this tick and the infestation of them and everything like that we are seeing here in the United States, what's the future of this looking like? Are we continuing to see more research dedicated to this? What does it look like for producers? We've obviously talked about being proactive as producers themselves, but the concern of it is obviously there. And what do we need to be doing there?
Yeah, I think one of the best things that, pieces of advice that I could give producers was to, be vigilant about being in tune with the health of your animals. Check on them regularly, and if you're running them through a chute to tag them or to treat them for something, just give them a good look over, kind of all over their body, to see if there are any ticks on them and if there are any ticks that you're not used to seeing. Unfortunately, I think Asian Longhorn ticks are probably here to stay. We've only had them for about 15 years. Other areas of the world have had them for 100 plus years. They've been moved around by human mediated transport and trade and other things like that. Given the fact that they're able to reproduce at such a high rate asexually, their population numbers can be extremely high. So that's going to be basically the hurdle that we're going to have to figure out how to overcome. So I think that, now we probably just have another tick that we're going to have to be dealing with.
Absolutely. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for your time today and for coming on to share more about this, and specifically sharing it from the producer standpoint about what they can be doing to stay vigilant and be proactive for their herd populations, not only from an economic impact, but from an animal welfare impact. I know I spent some time last week in the Branson area, and I got so many ticks on me. It wasn't even funny, and I was not having fun. So I will stick to my central Kansas area, and hopefully the ticks stay far away from me. And absolutely. So just seriously, thank you for your time today, Jonathan. We really appreciate it here at the team. And as always, to all of our listeners out there, we will have any of Jonathan's links linked down below if you guys would like to see more on Asian Longhorn ticks and just learn more about that, be a more proactive and educated producer population that we talk about on here a lot. And as always, like, subscribe, rate, review, and we'll see you all tomorrow on another episode. Have a good one, y'all.